Today I'm going to talk about my time flying the Phantom. Phantom, a real war machine. It's an aircraft that's been in service all over the world with many air forces for many years. In fact, I think even today in 2021, I think there are still some Phantoms flying around the place. But specifically, I'm going to be talking about the Phantom that I flew, which was in the air defence role in the Royal Air Force. But before I do that, perhaps it's worth mentioning that the RAF procured the Phantom in the 1960s, and initially it went into the air-to-ground role and also the reconnaissance role. And that really for a start, sums up the capability of this amazing aircraft. A real war machine and a multi-role aircraft at that as well. Later on, as the air defence Lightnings were being replaced, the Phantom moved into and took over from the Lightning in many squadrons. And that's really when I became involved with it in 1977. It's worth also adding that by this stage I'd been in the Air Force since 1965, so I'd had 12 years, most of it flying single-seat aircraft on the Lightning, 3 years training, and then 6 or 7 years flying the Lightning, and then I did 3 years instructing on the Nat and the Hunter. Then I was posted back to the air defence world onto the Lightning as a squadron leader by this stage. And I was going to number 111 Squadron at RAF Lucas in Scotland. Fantastic place. So 1977, 12 years, many single seats. So going to an aircraft like the Phantom was actually a very interesting time in my RAF career. Because I was now going into a two-seat aircraft, and so one of the things I had to really get used to was flying in the two-seat environment with navigators in the back seat. Well, we didn't call them navigators. As far as I was concerned, they were otherwise known as weapon system operators, but as far as I was concerned, they were fighter-gators. And I'll say right from the outset that some of my best friends today are fighter-gators who I flew with in the Phantom and later the Tornado. And a two-man crew. Although I was a single-seat man, very used to flying single-seat aircraft, the two-man crew, when it works together, is an exceedingly effective unit. That just sets the scene, really. But the Phantom itself, taking over, was a quantum leap forward from the Lightning. An aircraft of immense capability. Top speed, about the same as the Lightning, Mach 2. Low level, it was faster, it had a higher limiting speed, although the Lightning could have gone faster at low level if it didn't have restriction with the air intake. But the Phantom, as I recall, I think we were limited to about 750 knots at low level, and Mach 2 plus, Mach 2.3 I think at high level. The engines had been fitted, different from the American Phantoms. They had Rolls-Royce Spey engines, which had been fitted to the aircraft when the RAF procured them, primarily because the Spey was designed very much for the low-level environment, which of course is what the Phantom did when initially it came into RAF service. So when it came to the air defence world, we had an aircraft that had engines that were ideally suited to the low-level environment, but tended to run out of puff compared with the Lightning, certainly in the medium to high levels. So the engines had some limitations in the medium, subsonic, supersonic. Every aircraft I've flown, with the engines. Once an aircraft gets supersonic, it's like a thoroughbred. It really roars away. So that sets the scene. But the other things the Phantom had, it had vast capability. The radar was far superior to the radar we had in the Lightning. It was pulse radar. It had a pulse Doppler capability, pulse Doppler and pulse. And the range, without giving you the how far out we could see targets at great ranges compared to what we could see in the Lightning, which was normally about 20-25 miles. In the Phantom, it was 100 plus was not unknown at all. So that gave us, it was a new environment. It created more time to think almost. With two minds thinking in the cockpit, that was also an advantage as well. It also carried 8 missiles, 4 heat-seeking missiles and 4 radar-guided missiles. That itself gave it a huge capability. It didn't have an integral gun like the Lightning, but we did have the capability of putting on strapping on a Gatling gun, which itself was an amazing gun, fired at 6,000 rounds per minute. The aircraft also had an inertial navigation system, so the navigation was a different environment as well. Everything, avionics was a quantum leap forward. Everything was a quantum leap forward. We had to learn quite a lot. In fact, it was quite different from the Lightning, but a great aircraft, a real war machine. Flying it was, again, it had some interesting flying characteristics. The Phantom had relied on lots of below around the place and had wings that were shaped in different ways and control surfaces that flashed around without going into detail for the layman. Suffice to say that the real differences were one, with when the blow sort of came in, and also sort of if, for example, we were pulling a lot of G in combat or whatever situation, then unlike the Lightning where you could move the controls, the elevators, the ailerons and the rudders, if you were loaded up in the Phantom, in fact we had an angle of attack indicator. That was another new thing. So we used to fly what we call units. And when we were above 16 units in the Phantom, you used to turn by using the rudders, not with the aileron, which is the normal way of turning an aircraft. So that took some getting used to. And the reason was because when the aircraft was loaded up, if you tried to use the aileron, the aircraft it suffered from a phenomenon known as adverse yaw and was quite likely to turn the other way. So that just created differences. But it was a really fine aircraft to fly. Now I went to Coningsby, which is where the operational conversion unit was, in February 1977 to convert to the aircraft. I would normally have done a short course because I was an experienced air defence pilot, but because they had problems with the training system and they didn't have any sort of pilots coming through to team up with the baby navigators that were coming out of training, they said, well, would we do a long course and team up with the new navigators? And so we said, yeah, that's fine. So I did a long course at Coningsby. No complaints at all. Enjoyed the course a lot. That the training was somewhat different from the Lightning, where I was used to sort of flying 2, 3, 4 sorties a day. In the Phantom, sort of the briefings took longer, the debriefs took longer, the sorties took longer, because the range, you had an aircraft that could stay airborne much longer, and our average sortie length, we were flying 1 hour 45, 1 hour 50, sometimes up to 2.5 hours sorties. And as I'm going to talk in a little while, much longer sorties with air-to-air refueling. So we were flying longer sorties. Everything took longer, so you couldn't get more. You were lucky you couldn't get more than a couple of sorties in a day, really. But in training, because of you need to go through simulators and all sorts of preparatory training, you're lucky if you got 1 sortie a day. In fact, you're lucky if you got more than about 2 or 3 sorties a week. So it was a different environment, and that also took some getting used to, which I did. But it was good, and the capability of the aircraft just shone out. On the operational conversion course ourselves, much of the training we did, we obviously had to sort of convert to the aircraft, the usual general handling, instrument flying, formation flying, night flying, and then we were converted to the aircraft, and then we went into the radar phase, just like the Lightning, but of course taking advantage of the quantum leap forward in capability, and then into combat phase, tactical phase, and then graduated at the end of it. So it was an enjoyable course, and I certainly learnt a lot from it. Then I was posted to number Treble 1 Squadron at RAF Lucas, as I earlier said I was going to. Treble 1 was one of the most famous wartime squadrons, a top scoring unit in the Battle of Britain and in the war, one of the very top scoring units. And the motto was ad stantes, which stands for outstanding. Also, the squadron was famous because it had been equipped before the Phantom with the Lightning, before that with the Hunter, and in the Hunter days it was the home of the RAF Formation Aerobatic Team at the time, known as the Black Arrows. And it was the Black Arrows, in fact, with a few other aircraft from other squadrons, that at Farnborough, and I think it was 1952 or 50, maybe early 50s, broke the number of aircraft looping record, which still stands to this day. They looped 22 Hunters. That, believe me, is one hell of an achievement, not to be forgotten. So the squadron had a great history. Anyway, up to Lucas, and what I remember from that. Lucas was situated near the town of St Andrews, so apart from being a member of St Andrews Golf Club and being on the coast and being in Scotland, country of great traditions, it was a really nice place to be. The flying was great. We flew over the North Sea, or we did a lot of overland training, low-level overland sort of flying against other aircraft in Scotland, Northumberland, around the place. And Scotland is a brilliant place to fly at low level. Tactical flying was really interesting, exciting. It was challenging. It was fantastic. We also, up there, we sat quick reaction alert. Unlike when I've been on the Lightning, where we sat it when I was in Germany, we were on battle flight at 5 minutes readiness, and then back in the UK on the Lightning at 10 minutes readiness. The Phantom was also at 10 minutes readiness. Perhaps the main reason why it was at 10 minutes readiness because was the requirement to get the inertial navigation system aligned. But we had a hangar at Lucas with 2 aircraft permanently at 10 minutes, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and we used to get scrambled a lot. And we used to get, in most of the time, but not all the time, we'd get good intelligence and good notice of aircraft from Russia coming down into the area that we police, because as a squadron, initially we were responsible for the air defence of the United Kingdom, and that's quite a big area. It doesn't just cover the UK itself, but it covers a large sea area going out to hundreds of miles around the coast. So it's a big area to police, and later on, I'll talk about that when we went on to a different type of Phantom a little later on, but we used to get scrambled a lot, as I said, and we would we'd scramble silent, so we'd be pre-briefed. We knew what was going on. We knew where the tanker was going to, the tanker tow line was going to be for us to link up, and literally at an appointed time we would scramble. The air traffic control would know we were going to scramble at that time, and we'd scramble, and not a word was said, and we'd go up and join the tanker, and everything was done on the lights, because we have techniques and systems of how we join air-to-air refueling aircraft, mainly on the left-hand side, come alongside. The pilots would see us there, and then they'd give us clearance behind on the lights. We go behind, and then we refuel on the lights. Basically, it's like a traffic light system. If you get a red, you don't refuel, and if you get a green, you can refuel, or you get a sort of an amber, you can come in, and green indicates the fuel is flowing. So it was all done then. We'd depart, we'd come out, we'd depart off to the right-hand side of the tanker, and we'd go up, and then we'd sort of we'd start liaising with the airborne early warning aircraft, which in the early days, first when I got to Lucas, it was the Shackleton, which needed about 3 days' notice to get anywhere. But later on, it was the Boeing E-3A Sentry aircraft, which the RAF had procured 8 aircraft. But we didn't use just RAF aircraft, because there was a NATO Sentry squadron, and there were Americans. We worked very closely with the Americans from operating out of Iceland, and also the Norwegians operating out of Norway. So it was a really sort of multinational, it was a NATO type exercise. An exercise was an operation, quite frankly. We would get warning that the Russian bombers, and normally most of the ones we were intercepting in those days, were Bears and Badgers. Bears, big aircraft, Badgers, not so big, but still big. And they would come out of their bases up in right up near the north of Russia, and they get airborne. And around the north of Norway was they'd fly basically around the Cape up there and come down into our area. What were they doing most of the time? Well, they could be doing a number of things, quite frankly. Sometimes the Bears would be in transit to Cuba, and there'd normally be a pair of them. Sometimes they would be, if we ever knew, we did know, when the Russian fleet was going to be in the Atlantic operating, then we could absolutely guarantee that the Russians would come down and play with the Navy and the submarines in the Atlantic. And they're quite entitled to do that. It's international airspace, international waters. Perhaps it's worth saying that, and the same around the coast of the UK, the waters around the coast are international beyond 12 miles. So it's only within 12 miles from the coast that the waters belong to the UK, and they're entitled to be there. So they might come down and play with their Navy, in which case they'd be at low level. Most of the time they come down at high level and probably go down to low level. They might come down into the North Sea to have a look at the oil rigs there. We've seen that a few times. But most of the time, in fact, they'd be sort of practicing their war mission, which we knew was going to be to come round the North Cape and down towards the UK, and they would launch their standoff missiles from hundreds of miles away from the UK. So it was very important that we were able to get into a position to intercept these aircraft before hundreds of miles out, so they could see that we could do it, and we knew they were there. Occasionally you would find that the Russians would try and surprise us by coming down at low level, and sometimes, normally, they would be picked up fairly early on by radar in Norway, probably, or by airborne early warning. But we might get little notice a scramble, but that was fairly rare. So that's most of the time what they did, and we would get up there, we would intercept them. We'd have a good look at them because we always take loads of photographs, so that we could feed the photographs back to intelligence, because an aerial that sticks out of a new aerial, which I probably would know nothing about, but the intelligence world would be able to work out exactly what it is. So these photographs were very useful to the intelligence community. We would always identify the aircraft, and that included by day and night. Not too bad in the daytime, but nighttime can be a little bit problematical. So we had lights, and we had play with the moon, play with whatever light you have to try and get to visually identify the aircraft at all heights, and we'd do that because we would be intercepting these aircraft by day and night. So anyway, that was an interesting part of my tour at Lucas, and I intercepted over 30 Russian aircraft in that tour. We did have a 10 Bear Club, as it was called. Once you'd intercepted 10 bears, you became a member of the 10 Bear Club. You could wear a tie and wear a badge on your flying suit. Very proud of that. So that was that. The exercises were regular, as they were in those days, because we were still very much in a Cold War environment. We had to be ready to react at any time of the day and night, and we were tested a lot, because in the Cold War days, it was a very real Cold War, and we had to be prepared for whatever. So we were on our toes all the time. So that's roughly what we did. But I should have added that the squadron itself, Treble 1 squadron, was quite a big squadron. In fact, we had 15 to 16 aircraft, whereas most squadrons had 12 aircraft. And that the other thing that I noticed compared with the Lightnings, we had a huge number of aircrew, because of course the 16 aircraft, you'd have probably sort of over 20 crews, and I think we had 22 crews. In fact, we had I think 16 aircraft and 44 aircrew. But when you're used to a lightning squadron with 12 aircraft and 15 pilots, and all of a sudden you're on a squadron with 16 aircraft, not many more aircraft, but 44 aircrew, it's quite a different environment altogether. So it takes a bit of getting used to. The other thing that I remember from my days flying Phantoms at Lucas were we used to go regularly on detachment. We would go on armour practice camps to, initially we'd go to, in fact the very first armour practice camp I did was at Lucas, was in the range just off the coast from Scotland. But then the next one was in Malta, where we spent a magnificent 6 weeks in Malta. One with our efforts down there, won the gun firing trophy known as the Seed Trophy. The squadron was in really capable squadron at that time, but it was capable throughout. But I'm going to talk about a few events that happened in a moment. Then we ended up going to Cyprus. We go on regular detachments. We trained with NATO squadrons so we could all work together in dissimilar air combat and other mutual intercept training. We'd go on squadron detachments to almost anywhere in NATO, you name it, and we could go there. But they were always great fun, sort of working, going and visiting for a couple of weeks, another squadron, training with them, socialising with them, getting to know their area, because while we would send half the squadron over there, they would send half their squadron back to us. So it worked both ways as well. And we used to deploy, for example, I remember we used to deploy to Norway pretty regularly for a day, just fly out there in the morning, do a sortie or two of dissimilar air combat training, and then fly back, probably the next day. So there was plenty of variety of flying that went on. The downside of my tour on Treble One Squadron was the number of accidents we had. My first year there, we didn't have any accidents at all. And then we had a very sticky period. We had an aircraft was lost doing intercept training. We used to do intercept training at all heights, so you never knew where the target was going to be. That was the capability of the Phantom. He could be anywhere between sea level and 50,000 feet. But such was the capability of the Phantom that you could easily sort of find the targets in those days. But on this one occasion, unfortunately, it was an American exchange pilot, in fact, who flew into the sea. So we lost an aircraft and 2 crew on that occasion. And then that was a little more than 3 months later, a very good friend of mine who'd been flying Lightnings with me, he was night flying. I was night flying also at the time, and he disappeared, and he and his fighter gator, they were lost. They crashed into sea as well. It was thought they might have had a double generator failure, which if they had that and hadn't put out the ram air turbine, they would have, because they didn't have a battery in that particular aircraft. Lighting in the cockpit would have been a problem, but I don't know exactly what happened on that one. And then we had another accident. We lost another Phantom a little more than a month later, in fact, but the pilot and the fighter gator survived that one. And I'll never forget, because I was airborne again at the time, and I was diverted to where the search area. And I'll never forget sort of seeing the red flare, which told me immediately that that at least one was in a dinghy, and that was a great feeling of relief to know that at least one had survived. Well, they both survived. And we lost an aircraft. We were doing dissimilar air combat training down at RAF Aukerbury, which was an American base in Cambridgeshire, Huntingdonshire at the time, and that was an American base. And I was the detachment commander on that one, in fact. And one of the aircraft on the way back was just turning finals to land when the radome, the nose of the aircraft, where the radar is housed, the radome came open, and the aircraft really sort of turned from a flying machine into a flat plate machine, and they both had to eject as well. And there were other instances. We had, from the flight safety perspective and the accident perspective, it was quite a sad period. I'll never forget it, because although throughout my flying career you always expect these things to happen, and they do happen, and many of my friends over the years have died in aircraft accidents. Fortunately, that sort of thing happens very rarely these days, very rarely. It's a lot more regular those days. Believe me, sort of in the days after the war, it was very regular. So that's a subject of separate talk, where flight safety's come from. It's made a big difference. But that was pretty sad. The other thing that I remember from Lucas was the Phantom. We had two squadrons. We had two squadrons of RAF Phantoms there, both flying the Phantom F4M, Trouble 1 Squadron, and the other squadron was 43 Squadron. And initially we had a Navy squadron there, 892 Squadron, which was operating, when it was a C, was operating off HMS Ark Royal, when not a C, and operating from Lucas. So we knew them very well indeed. That was good fun. They were flying a different Phantom, the F4K. But why I'm raising this was because during the tour there, first of all, HMS Ark Royal came out of out of Navy service, and all of a sudden the Navy had no carrier capability for a few years. So at that stage, two things happened. The RAF took over responsibility for the air defence of the fleet. That was a new role, which was an interesting role to fulfil as well. So we did that for quite a few years before the new carriers came in. Through-deck cruisers they were known as, but they were really aircraft carriers. And the other thing was the Navy Phantoms, which were very capable aircraft, but different from the RAF Phantoms, but they were handed over to the RAF. And although 43 Squadron at Lucas was already flying the F4K, as it was, we on Trouble 1 Squadron received the Navy Phantoms, F4Ks, and so they came from 892 to us, and we had to I had the responsibility, in fact, of getting people trained up on that aircraft, because it was different. It had a different, didn't have an inertial navigation system. It had a navigation computer, which was different. It had other minor differences from the avionic perspective. There were things that would be included in that aircraft which were designed for carrier operations. So there was quite a lot to learn differently. The radios were different. There were lots of differences. I won't go into them in detail. So it was quite a challenging tour. I was there from August 77 until November 1980. So just over 3 years, but not plenty of time to get, as I did. I got over 1,000 hours in my time on the Phantom. And I remember it very well. I remember my time at Lucas with great affection. I remember my time on Trouble 1 Squadron with great affection. I remember the Phantom with great affection. It was, and as long as it remained in RAF service, and it still is, quite frankly, a very capable aircraft wherever it is in the world today. But a real war machine. Thank you.